They didn't ban your gun. They did something smarter. They put your rights on layaway and they're charging you interest. California slapped an 11% excise tax on every firearm and every box of ammunition sold in the state, active since July of 24. Colorado passed their version, 6.5%, and it hit on April 1st of this year. New York has a bill on the table right now, Senate Bill S5813, another 11%. Maryland, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Washington are all drafting their own versions. Think about that map for a second. This isn't a California problem. This is a coordinated strategy moving state by state, and it's happening fast. They're calling it a sin tax, the same category as cigarettes, the same category as a slot machine. The government just told you that owning a firearm is a moral failing and requires a penalty at the register. And before you tell me your state is safe, I need you to follow where that money actually goes, because that's where the real story is, and it's not what they told you. I know the instinct. I don't live in California. I don't live in Colorado. This isn't my fight yet. That's exactly what Coloradans said 2 years ago. So let me put this in concrete terms, because this hits three things every one of you cares about directly. First, your wallet. Firearm and ammunition manufacturers already pay a federal excise tax of 10 to 11% under the Pittman-Robertson Act. That's baked into the price before the product ever hits the shelf. Now, stack California's additional 11% state excise tax on top. Stack Colorado's 6.5% on top. Stack your state's sales tax on top of all of that. A $500 rifle in California now runs you $555 at minimum before you buy a single round of ammunition. That math compounds every time you train, every time you restock, every time you try to stay proficient. Next is your freedom. You don't have to ban a constitutional right to kill it. You just have to price it out of reach for the working class. The wealthy, they absorb it. But the veteran on a fixed income, the single mom in a rural county, the young family trying to responsibly arm their home, they feel every dollar of it. We have a name for this in American history: poll taxes. Southern states didn't ban voting outright. They charged a fee that disproportionately excluded people who couldn't pay. The 24th Amendment abolished poll taxes in 1964 because the country recognized you cannot condition a constitutional right on the ability to pay a government-imposed fee. The mechanism here is identical. The only thing that changed is the right being targeted. As a mom and as a nurse, I've watched what happens to people who can't protect themselves. The cost of a firearm, the cost of ammunition, the cost of staying trained, it all adds up. When you layer punitive taxes onto every part of that equation, you make self-defense a luxury good. That is a policy choice. It's not a side effect. They have an argument for why this is justified, though, and I want to give it to you straight, because it's not a weak one. Here's the strongest version of the case for these taxes, not the bumper sticker version, the real one. Federal funding for crime victim services has collapsed. In Colorado specifically, money flowing in through the Federal Victims of Crime Act dropped from nearly $57 million in 2018 down to $13 million by 2024, a 76% cut in 6 years. Real domestic violence shelters, real emergency housing programs, real legal services for survivors, running out of money through no fault of their own. Colorado's state rep Monica Duran, the Democrat who sponsored Prop KK, is herself a domestic violence survivor who used those services. She makes a genuine case. Drivers pay a gas tax for roads, not because they're bad drivers, but because the infrastructure requires sustained funding. Her argument is that gun owners can contribute a modest percentage to offset the societal costs connected to firearms. The most compelling version of that argument is this: the tax destinations in Colorado, victim services, veterans' mental health, children's behavioral health, school safety. Those are causes that most reasonable people agree are worth funding. And 54% of Colorado voters agreed. That passed at the ballot box. That's the glossy version. And it's the version that closed the deal in 2 states. But here's where the logic breaks down. And it breaks down completely. They're solving a federal budget failure on the backs of people who had nothing to do with creating it. The VOCA funding didn't collapse because gun owners stopped paying their share. It collapsed because of federal prosecution policy decisions made in Washington. And the solution they landed on was to reach into the wallets of law-abiding buyers in their state. People who are already paying a federal excise tax every time they purchase a firearm or ammo. And when you reach past the state destinations and look at where California specifically directs its revenue, the story changes entirely. Stay with me. Let's go line by line. The details are what the headlines skip. Gun owners are already paying and have been since 1937. The Pittman-Robertson Federal Aid in Wildlife Restoration Act imposes a 10 to 11% excise tax on firearms and ammunition at the manufacturer level. In fiscal year 2025, that generated $1.3 billion distributed to every state in the country for wildlife conservation, public shooting ranges, and hunter education. Since the program launched, the inflation-adjusted total exceeds $29 billion. Gun owners built the conservation infrastructure of this country, not federal agencies, not environmental lobbying groups. Gun owners, through a tax they voluntarily supported because it served a direct and measurable public benefit. These new state sin taxes aren't building on that legacy. They're funding its opposite. California's money goes to disarmament. California's AB 28 directs excise revenue explicitly towards gun relinquishment programs and gun safety advocacy. That language is in the law. You buy a firearm, that purchase generates a tax. That tax funds a government program designed to remove firearms from civilian ownership and bankroll further restrictions on your rights. You're being charged at the point of purchase to fund the movement working against your purchase. That's not a public health fund. It's a circular disarmament mechanism embedded in the tax code. And here's a number they buried. That tax is already suppressing legal sales. California originally projected its 11% excise tax would generate $159 million in fiscal year 24-25. The administration revised that down to $103 million, then $65 million. According to California Legislative Analysis Office, actual collections through the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 24-25 tracked at just $44 million. That's a collapse from a $159 million projection down to a pace of roughly $59 million annualized and falling. That gap isn't a forecasting error. That's legal gun buyers leaving the market. That's the intended outcome, and the revenue underperformance proves it's working. Criminals pay zero. The DOJ's Bureau of Justice Statistics, their own agency, their own data, shows that approximately 90% of felons convicted of firearm crimes obtained those weapons illegally. 90%. Through theft, through straw purchases, through black market channels. Not one of them walked into a licensed dealer, passed a background check, and paid an 11% excise tax. The sin tax hits none of them. Every single dollar of this tax is extracted from the law-abiding buyer. If the state goal were actually to reduce gun violence, you would designate a mechanism that reaches the source of gun violence. This one deliberately doesn't. That should tell you what the real goal is. The lawsuits are live, and this is where it gets important. On March 31st, 2025, one day before Colorado's tax took effect, the NRA, the Second Amendment Foundation, the Firearms Policy Coalition, and several other organizations filed suit in Denver District Court. The case is Langston versus Humphreys. They're asking for a permanent injunction and a declaratory judgment that the tax is unconstitutional. Their argument cites long-standing Supreme Court precedent. A constitutional right cannot be singled out for special taxation. The court has said this before, repeatedly. At the same time, two California gun ranges, Poway Weapons and Gear and Sacramento Gun Range, filed for summary judgment against California's 11% tax, arguing it violates Bruin, Heller, and Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. Their brief makes a blunt point. If California's 11% tax is upheld, there is nothing legally preventing the state from imposing a 50%, 100%, or even 1,000% tax on firearms and ammunition. No ceiling, no limit, just a government with a pricing gun pointed at your constitutional rights. Both cases are active right now. The courts are the last line of defense, and they're not guaranteed to hold it. Meanwhile, the Freedom from Unfair Gun Taxes Act, H.R. 2442 and S. 1169, was introduced in Congress by Reps. Issa and Hudson and Senator Risch in March and April of 2025. It would prohibit states from using excise taxes to fund gun control programs. Republicans control both chambers. It has not passed. It's not cleared committee. Now let's talk about what all of this means through the only lens that holds up when you strip away the spin. This isn't a revenue debate. This is a power grab dressed in budget language. Here's the administrative state playbook, spelled out plainly. You can't ban firearms outright. Heller and Bruin make that legally difficult. But you don't have to ban them. You tax them. You regulate the dealers who sell them. You require insurance. You mandate registration. You layer enough financial friction onto the exercise of a constitutional right until people stop exercising it. Not because it's illegal, but because it's unaffordable. If a tax can suppress a constitutional right, no right is safe. Is the First Amendment next? A misinformation liability fee per article published? A licensing tax on churches operating in high-risk neighborhoods? The logic doesn't stop at the Second Amendment. It never does. Once the mechanism is validated, it becomes available for every right on the list. The free market is being crushed too. Excise taxes and new mandatory dealer registration requirements don't hurt Walmart. They destroy small, local gun shops operating on thin margins with no compliance department. Big box retailers absorb the cost and adjust their pricing. The neighborhood shop closes. The market consolidates. And a consolidated, reduced industry is much easier to regulate, pressure, and eventually eliminate. That's not a side effect of this policy. That's an accelerant. And here's a direct word to the Republican Party. The Freedom from Unfair Gun Taxes Act has been sitting in a Republican-controlled Congress for over a year. Your constituents' constitutional rights are being taxed into dormancy across 8 states. We introduced a bill is not leadership. Co-sponsorships, floor votes, and signed law. That's leadership. If you won't fight for this, your base should be asking why. And here's where the road leads if none of that changes. The pattern is locked in. The legal framework exists. Here's the realistic timeline. In the next 6 to 18 months, New York or Virginia passes the next version. New York's S5813 proposes 11%, matching California. When a third major state enacts this, the model is normalized. It becomes the template. Expect the rate to climb in subsequent states, emboldened by the fact that no federal court has issued an injunction yet. In the next 2 to 5 years, one or both active lawsuits reach an appellate court, possibly the Supreme Court. If the court strikes down the sin tax model, it's dead nationwide. But if it upholds it, every state in the country gets the green light to price out the Second Amendment. That ruling will define gun rights in America for a generation. And right now, it could go either way. Here's the collateral damage nobody is talking about. If legal gun sales continue declining in tax states, which is the explicit goal, federal Pittman-Robertson excise collections will fall with them. Less legal purchasing means less federal revenue for wildlife conservation in all 50 states. The programs gun owners built since 1937 start to erode because the government deliberately suppressed the sales that funded them. The domino effect is simple. If you can tax a constitutional right into dormancy, every right is available for the same treatment. Property, speech, assembly. The mechanism doesn't care which right it targets next. But you are not powerless, not even close. So stop scrolling. 3 things. Pick at least one before you close this. First up, call your U.S. representative and both senators today. Not an email, a phone call. Ask specifically whether they have co-sponsored H.R. 2442 and S. 1169. The Freedom from Unfair Gun Taxes Act. If they haven't, ask why, out loud, on the record. Congressional offices track call volume by issue. 100 calls on the same bill in 1 week moves the needle. Find your representatives at usa.gov/elected-officials. It takes 4 minutes. Second, if your state has a pending bill, get on the record. Find your state legislator and submit a written statement to the relevant committee hearing. Written opposition becomes part of the official legislative record permanently. Most of these bills advance because organized opposition never materializes. Show up and you change that. Third, spend local, spend now. Your next firearm or ammunition purchase should go through a local gun shop, not a big box retailer or online warehouse. Small shops are the first casualties when these taxes hit. They're also the first line of community-level political resistance. They know their legislators, their customers, and their community. Every dollar you spend locally keeps that line intact. If this video opened your eyes, subscribe and share it with that one person who still thinks these taxes are about public safety. Let them follow the money. Finally, a right you can't afford to exercise is not a right. It's a privilege, and they just set the price. I'll see you next time. Bye.